Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to drift away to Joshua and the Promised Land, crossing the Jordan River? Welcome to Easy Drift Sleep. Tonight we find out, one quiet detail at a time. If these stories bring you peace, a quick subscribe means we can keep making them for you. Now settle in, slow your breathing, and let your mind wander. The sun had begun its slow, deliberate descent, casting long, bruised shadows across the arid landscape of the plains of Moab, painting the eastern sky in hues of soft rose and fading lavender, while the air, still holding the day's residual warmth, carried the faint, dry scent of dust and distant scrub. A gentle breeze, almost imperceptible, rustled through the sparse, tough grasses that clung stubbornly to the earth, whispering secrets to the ancient stones scattered across the plateau, and the only other sound was the distant, rhythmic murmur of the Jordan River, a persistent, watery hum that had been the backdrop to these people's lives for weeks, a constant reminder of the barrier that lay between them and their long-awaited destination. For 40 years, the children of Israel had wandered, their footsteps echoing across the vast, silent stretches of the wilderness, a journey of both hardship and profound transformation, and now, after decades spent beneath the relentless desert sun and the cool, star-dusted nights, they stood poised on the very edge of a new beginning, their encampment spread out like a patchwork quilt across the plains, a temporary city of tents and shelters, each one a small universe of quiet anticipation. The sun's last rays caught the edges of the canvas and the simple woven fabrics, making them glow briefly before darkness began to gather in earnest, draping a soft, velvet cloak over the land. Moses, their venerable leader, the one who had guided them through the parting of the Red Sea and the giving of the law on Sinai's thunderous peak, was no longer with them, his earthly journey having concluded on the lonely heights of Mount Nebo, where he had gazed upon the Promised Land from afar, a vista of green valleys and distant hills shimmering in the haze, a sight he was destined never to enter. His passing had left a quiet, profound ache in the hearts of the people, a sense of loss that mingled with the burgeoning hope of what lay ahead, a bittersweet mixture of farewell and welcome. Now, the mantle of leadership had fallen upon Joshua, the son of Nun, a man whose quiet strength and unwavering faith had been forged in the crucible of those 40 years, a man who had served Moses faithfully, learning the rhythms of leadership and the deep, abiding trust in the unseen hand that guided their every step. He was a man of the people, yet set apart by the immense weight of the responsibility now resting upon his shoulders, a burden he carried with a quiet dignity, his gaze often sweeping across the vast expanse of the camp, then turning westward, towards the faint, dark line of trees that marked the course of the Jordan, and beyond it, the hazy silhouette of the hills of Canaan. 3 days had passed since the final, solemn rites for Moses, 3 days during which the camp had settled into a new routine, a quiet hum of preparation and expectation, the air thick with unspoken questions and the rustle of anticipation. Joshua, in these days, had moved among the people, his presence a steadying anchor, his voice calm and reassuring as he spoke with the elders, with the heads of the tribes, with the ordinary men and women who comprised this vast nation. He had given them instructions, clear and concise, yet imbued with a sense of the sacred, for what they were about to undertake was not merely a military maneuver, but a holy procession, a divine appointment. On this particular evening, as the stars began to prick through the deepening blue of the sky, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the camp, Joshua had sent out officers throughout the encampment, their voices carrying softly in the twilight, repeating the instructions that had been given earlier in the day. The message was simple, yet profound, a call to readiness, a summons to prepare their hearts and their provisions for the journey that lay just beyond the dawn. "Prepare your provisions," the officers called out, their voices echoing gently from tent to tent, "for within 3 days you are to cross this Jordan, to go in to possess the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess." The words hung in the cool evening air, each syllable a gentle chime of destiny, a promise whispered across the plains. The people, gathered in small groups around flickering cook fires, listened intently, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames, their eyes reflecting the quiet awe that had begun to settle over them. Children, usually boisterous and full of endless energy, huddled closer to their parents, sensing the momentous shift in the air, the subtle change in the rhythm of their temporary home. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the aroma of roasting grains and simmering stews, comforting and familiar, yet tinged now with the sharp, exciting tang of impending change. Archaeological evidence from sites like Khirbet el-Makatir, believed by some to be biblical Ari, or the extensive fortifications uncovered at Jericho, paint a picture of the formidable challenges that awaited them. The cities of Canaan were not mere collections of tents, they were fortified strongholds, with massive walls built of sun-dried mud brick and stone, often double-layered, designed to withstand prolonged sieges. The people of Canaan, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, were known for their martial prowess, their chariots, and their deeply entrenched polytheistic practices, worshipping a pantheon of gods and goddesses, often with elaborate and sometimes gruesome rituals. These were not primitive tribes, but complex societies with sophisticated agricultural practices, trade networks, and a rich, albeit often brutal, culture. Joshua, in his quiet moments, must have contemplated the enormity of the task, the sheer scale of the undertaking. He had been one of the 12 spies sent by Moses 40 years earlier to scout out this very land, and he remembered vividly the giants, the Anakim, and the walled cities that had struck fear into the hearts of 10 of his companions. But he also remembered the lushness of the land, the clusters of grapes so heavy they required 2 men to carry, the pomegranates and figs, the flowing milk and honey that had confirmed the divine promise. His faith, unlike that of the others, had not wavered, grounded as it was in the powerful, tangible presence of God he had witnessed throughout their wilderness journey. He knew, too, the history of this place, the ancient trade routes that snaked through the valleys, connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia, the fertile crescent that had cradled some of the earliest civilizations. The Jordan River itself was a vital artery, flowing from the snow-capped peaks of Mount Hermon down to the Dead Sea, creating a narrow, fertile strip amidst an otherwise arid landscape. Its waters, though often muddy and unpredictable, especially during the spring harvest when the snows melted and swelled its banks, were life-giving, sustaining a vibrant ecosystem of reeds, willows, and diverse wildlife. As the officers completed their rounds, a hush fell over the camp, a collective breath held in quiet anticipation. The stars above seemed to burn brighter, each one a distant, silent witness to the unfolding drama. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp earth from the riverbanks, a smell that promised both sustenance and challenge. The next morning, with the first blush of dawn painting the eastern sky in soft pastels, Joshua rose early, his heart filled with a quiet resolve. He knew the weight of expectation that rested upon him, the hopes and fears of millions of people, but he also carried within him the unwavering assurance of a divine promise. He gathered the people, not in a loud, boisterous assembly, but in a calm, orderly fashion, their movements unhurried, their faces reflecting a mixture of solemnity and eagerness. He addressed them, his voice clear and steady, carrying across the vast multitude. "Sanctify yourselves," he commanded, "for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." The word sanctify resonated deeply within their collective memory, calling to mind the preparations made before the giving of the law at Sinai, a time of ritual purification, of setting themselves apart, both physically and spiritually, for a sacred encounter. It meant washing their clothes, abstaining from certain activities, and focusing their minds and hearts on the holiness of the moment. It was a call to internal readiness, a preparation not just of their bodies, but of their very souls, for the miraculous intervention they were about to witness. The people responded with quiet obedience, a deep sense of reverence settling over the camp. The day passed in a subdued manner, a day of quiet introspection, of prayer, of making ready. The usual sounds of daily life, the grinding of grain, the chatter of women, the playful shouts of children, were muted, replaced by a gentle hum of anticipation, a soft rustle of movement as people prepared their belongings, checked their provisions, and gathered their thoughts. As evening descended once more, the air grew still and cool, the stars emerging again like scattered diamonds on a velvet cloth. The distant murmur of the Jordan seemed to grow louder, a constant, rhythmic presence, a reminder of the barrier that lay ahead. The scent of night-blooming desert flowers, subtle and sweet, drifted on the light breeze, mingling with the earthy smell of the river. The next morning, the third day since Joshua's initial command, the sun rose with a quiet majesty, bathing the plains in a soft, golden light. A cool mist, typical of the Jordan Valley in the early hours, hung low over the river, obscuring its immediate banks, giving it an ethereal, mysterious quality. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and growing things, a stark contrast to the dry, dusty air of the desert they had known for so long. Joshua, his face calm and resolute, gave the final instructions. He spoke to the priests, those men set apart for sacred service, who bore the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in their possession. The Ark, a gilded wooden chest, intricately crafted according to divine specifications, contained the tablets of the law, Aaron's staff that had budded, and a pot of manna, tangible reminders of God's covenant and provision. It was the very presence of God among them, a physical manifestation of his guiding hand. "Take up the Ark of the Covenant," Joshua instructed them, his voice clear and steady, "and pass on before the people." He then turned to the people, his gaze sweeping over the vast multitude, their faces upturned, expectant. "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." A profound silence fell over the camp, a silence so deep that one could almost hear the beating of their own hearts, the soft rustle of their garments in the gentle breeze. The only sound was the distant, persistent murmur of the river, a low, watery drone that seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. Joshua continued, his voice imbued with a quiet authority. "By this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan." His words painted a vivid picture of the future, a future where the formidable inhabitants of Canaan would be dispossessed, a future where the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would finally be fulfilled. The mention of the ark, the very symbol of God's presence, moving ahead of them, was a powerful reassurance, a tangible sign that they were not alone, that the divine power that had parted the Red Sea was still with them, still actively engaged in their journey. He then gave specific instructions for the 12 men chosen from each of the 12 tribes, men who would play a crucial role in marking this momentous crossing. "Now therefore, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man from every tribe. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from upstream, and they shall stand as a heap." The instructions were precise, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. The priests, bearing the sacred ark, were to be the first to step into the river. Their very act of faith, their willingness to trust in the unseen, would be the catalyst for the miracle. The waters, swollen and powerful from the spring thaw, would not merely recede, but would be cut off, standing as a heap, a wall of water held back by an invisible hand, creating a dry pathway for the entire nation to cross. The scene that unfolded next was one of quiet, awe-inspiring majesty. The priests, clad in their sacred vestments, their faces solemn and focused, lifted the Ark of the Covenant onto their shoulders. The golden poles, extending from the Ark, gleamed softly in the morning light as they began their slow, deliberate march towards the river. Behind them, in a carefully ordered procession, came the Levites, then the various tribes, each moving with a quiet dignity, their eyes fixed on the Ark, the visible sign of God's presence. The air was still, save for the soft scuff of sandals on the dusty ground, the faint rustle of clothing, and the rhythmic, almost hypnotic chant of the river in the distance. The sun, now fully above the horizon, began to burn away the last vestiges of the morning mist, revealing the full breadth and power of the Jordan. It was the time of harvest, the barley harvest, which typically occurred in the early spring, usually March or April. This was precisely when the Jordan River was at its fullest, swollen by the melting snows from Mount Hermon and the Galilean hills, often overflowing its banks, making it a formidable barrier. The river, normally about 100 feet wide in this area, could expand significantly, its current swift and treacherous. To attempt a crossing at this time would normally be an act of sheer folly, an invitation to disaster. Yet, this was precisely the moment chosen for the divine intervention, emphasizing the miraculous nature of the event. The priests, with the ark resting heavily on their shoulders, continued their measured pace, their eyes fixed on the swirling, muddy waters ahead. They reached the very edge of the river, where the bank sloped gently into the current, the water lapping at the reeds and grasses that grew along the edge. The sound of the rushing water grew louder, a powerful, insistent roar that filled the air, a natural force that seemed to mock the idea of passage. And then, as the soles of their feet, encased in simple leather sandals, touched the cold, swirling water, something extraordinary began to happen. It wasn't a sudden, violent parting like the Red Sea, but a gradual, almost gentle cessation. The waters that flowed down from upstream, from the north, from the distant Sea of Galilee began to pile up, to stand still as a heap, far off at a city called Adam, which is beside Zarethan. This ancient city, Adam, has been identified by archaeologists with Tel Edemiah, a site strategically located near a natural constriction in the Jordan Valley, where landslides have historically dammed the river. It is a fascinating detail that speaks to the precise geographical knowledge of the biblical writers, grounding the miraculous in a recognizable landscape. The waters flowing downstream towards the Dead Sea were completely cut off, continuing their course until the riverbed was entirely dry, revealing the muddy, rock-strewn bottom. The transformation was not instantaneous, but unfolded with a quiet, majestic power, like a slow-motion unraveling of nature's laws. The roar of the rushing water gradually subsided, replaced by an eerie, profound silence, broken only by the soft lapping of the remaining pools and the distant murmurs of the awestruck multitude. A path, dry and firm, began to appear before them, stretching across the width of the riverbed, a pathway that had been submerged for millennia, now exposed by an invisible hand. The exposed riverbed was likely a mixture of mud, sand, and smooth, water-worn stones, perhaps still damp in places, but solid enough to bear the weight of a nation. The air, which had been filled with the sound of rushing water, was now filled with a sense of profound wonder, a collective gasp of astonishment that rippled through the ranks of the Israelites. The priests, bearing the Ark of the Covenant, moved forward, their feet now treading on the dry ground of the riverbed, advancing to the very center of the Jordan. There they stood firm, their figures silhouetted against the towering wall of water upstream, a silent, powerful testament to the divine presence that had orchestrated this miracle. Their presence in the middle of the riverbed was not just symbolic, it was practical, serving as a beacon, a focal point for the entire nation as they began their crossing. And so, the entire nation of Israel, a vast multitude numbering perhaps 2 million souls, began to cross the Jordan River on dry ground. The sheer scale of this movement was immense, a slow, steady stream of humanity, their footsteps echoing softly on the newly revealed riverbed. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast a warm, golden light on the scene, illuminating the faces of the people, etched with a mixture of awe, relief, and profound gratitude. The sound of their crossing was not a cacophony, but a low, sustained hum to the soft shuffling of thousands of feet, the occasional bleating of sheep and goats being led across, the quiet murmur of parents reassuring their children, the creak of wooden carts laden with belongings. The air, now free from the mist, was clear and bright, carrying the dry, earthy scent of the exposed riverbed, mingled with the familiar smell of dust and humanity. From their vantage point on the eastern bank, those waiting to cross could see the priest standing steadfast in the middle of the river, the ark gleaming in the sunlight, a fixed point in the midst of the impossible. They could see the wall of water upstream, held back by an unseen force, shimmering like a colossal, liquid crystal, a breathtaking sight that defied all natural laws. Downstream, the riverbed lay completely dry, stretching towards the distant haze of the Dead Sea, a testament to the completeness of the miracle. The crossing was not a hurried, panicked scramble, but an orderly, disciplined movement, a testament to the years of wilderness training and the leadership of Joshua. Tribe by tribe, family by family, they made their way across, their hearts swelling with a renewed sense of purpose and an unshakable faith in the God who had brought them thus far. The journey across the riverbed, though perhaps only a few hundred yards wide, felt like a passage through time, a bridge between their past in the wilderness and their future in the Promised Land. Each step was a step into a new chapter, a new covenant, a new beginning. As the last of the people made their way across, the sun began its slow, deliberate descent towards the western horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the now dry riverbed. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant vegetation. The priests, still standing firm in the center of the Jordan, remained steadfast, their figures unwavering, their presence a silent anchor for the entire nation. The wall of water upstream continued to hold, a majestic, silent monument to the power that had created this impossible pathway. The entire scene was imbued with a quiet, profound holiness, a moment suspended between the natural and the divine, a moment that would forever be etched into the collective memory of the people of Israel, a story to be told and retold for generations, a tangible reminder of the living God who walked among them, who made a way where there was no way, who led them through the very heart of the impossible, bringing them ever closer to the land of promise, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land they were now finally ready to possess, their hearts filled with a quiet awe, their minds still reeling from the wonder they had just witnessed, the gentle lapping of the water now a distant memory, replaced by the soft whisper of the breeze through the newly encountered trees of the western bank, a lullaby of arrival, a silent welcome to a new home. Filled with a quiet awe, their minds still reeling from the wonder they had just witnessed, the gentle lapping of the water now a distant memory, replaced by the soft whisper of the breeze through the newly encountered trees of the western bank, a lullaby of arrival, a silent welcome to a new home. The sun, having journeyed across the sky, now began its slow descent towards the western horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the fertile plains of Jericho, painting the landscape in hues of gold and rose as the last rays of daylight touched the distant hills. A hush had fallen over the vast multitude of Israelites, a quietude born of exhaustion and profound gratitude, their feet now firmly planted on the soil of Canaan, a land promised to their ancestors so many generations ago, a promise now unfolding before their very eyes. The air, still carrying the faint scent of the Jordan's rich, damp earth, mingled with the dry, fragrant aroma of the desert shrubs and the subtle, sweet perfume of the blossoming plants that thrived in the milder climate west of the river. As the twilight deepened, Joshua, his heart heavy with the weight of responsibility yet buoyed by an unshakable faith, gathered the 12 men who had carried the sacred stones from the riverbed, their shoulders still perhaps aching from the weight of those ancient, water-smoothed rocks. He spoke to them in a low, measured tone, his voice carrying the calm authority of a leader who had walked with God in the wilderness for 40 years, a voice that had witnessed the miraculous and understood the profound significance of every divine instruction. He reminded them of the Lord's command, given before the crossing, that each man was to take a stone from the very place where the priest's feet had stood firm, a place now dry and exposed beneath the river's absent flow. These stones, he explained, were not merely pebbles or fragments of rock, but enduring memorials, tangible reminders of the day the living God had parted the waters of the Jordan for his people, just as he had once parted the Red Sea for their forefathers. They were to carry these 12 stones to the place where they would make their first camp, a place that would soon be known as Gilgal, a name that would forever echo with the memory of this miraculous passage. The men, their faces etched with a mixture of weariness and wonder, nodded in understanding, their hands already reaching for the heavy stones that lay waiting, each one a silent testament to an extraordinary event. The task of carrying these 12 stones, each one substantial enough to be a burden, began as the stars slowly emerged in the darkening sky, twinkling like scattered diamonds across the vast, inky canvas above. The men moved with a quiet determination, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth, the only sounds the rustle of their garments and the occasional, soft grunt of effort as they adjusted their grip on the weighty rocks. Imagine the feeling of those stones in their hands, cool and smooth from the river's embrace, yet now dry and warm from the lingering heat of the day, each one a piece of history, a physical link to the moment of divine intervention. As they walked towards the designated camping ground, the plains of Jericho stretched out before them, a fertile expanse that promised sustenance after the long years of desert wandering. The air grew cooler with the deepening night, and a gentle breeze whispered through the tall grasses, carrying the earthy smell of cultivated land, a stark contrast to the arid winds of the wilderness they had left behind. The distant outlines of trees, perhaps sycamores or date palms, swayed gently, their dark forms silhouetted against the faint glow of the western sky. The camp was established at Gilgal, a place whose name, in time, would come to mean a rolling away, a powerful symbol of the reproach of Egypt being rolled away from them. This first night on the western side of the Jordan was one of quiet activity, as families sought out their places, unrolled their tents, and began the familiar rituals of settling in. The flickering light of small cooking fires began to dot the landscape, casting dancing shadows on the tent walls and illuminating the faces of tired but content individuals. The scent of wood smoke, mingled with the aroma of simple meals being prepared, drifted gently on the night air, a comforting perfume of domesticity after the day's extraordinary events. The 12 stones were carefully placed in a prominent spot at Gilgal, arranged perhaps in a circle or a towering pile, a silent monument under the watchful gaze of the moon and stars. Joshua stood before them, his gaze sweeping over the sleeping camp, then resting on the newly erected memorial. He knew that in the generations to come, children would ask their fathers, "What do these stones mean?" And the fathers would recount the miraculous tale, their voices filled with pride and reverence, explaining how the waters of the Jordan had been cut off before the Ark of the Covenant, how the entire nation had passed over on dry ground, a testament to the mighty hand of their God. This monument was not just for memory, but for instruction, a tangible lesson for future generations, ensuring that the wonder of that day would never fade. The days that followed at Gilgal were a period of transition and preparation. The Israelites, having crossed into the land of Canaan, were now poised to fulfill the ancient promise. But before they could truly claim their inheritance, there were sacred duties to perform, rituals that had been neglected during their long journey through the wilderness. The most significant of these was the renewal of the covenant through circumcision. For 40 years, as they wandered in the desert, the rite of circumcision had largely ceased, perhaps due to the harsh conditions or the constant movement, or perhaps as a sign of a temporary suspension of the full covenant blessings during a period of divine discipline. Now, at Gilgal, with the Jordan behind them and the promised land before them, it was time to re-establish their identity as God's chosen people, to renew their commitment to the covenant established with Abraham. Joshua, once again, received a divine command, a solemn instruction that underscored the spiritual significance of their arrival. He was to make flint knives, tools of ancient origin, sharp and precise, and circumcise all the males who had been born during the wilderness wanderings, those who had not received the sign of the covenant. Imagine the scene at Gilgal, a vast encampment, as this sacred and painful rite was performed. The air would have been thick with a mix of anticipation, solemnity, and perhaps a quiet apprehension. The flint knives, carefully crafted, would have glinted in the sunlight, their edges honed to a keen sharpness. The process would have been methodical, perhaps taking several days, as thousands of men, from young boys to those who had reached adulthood in the desert, underwent the procedure. There would have been hushed conversations, the low murmurs of prayer, and the quiet sounds of pain endured with stoicism, for this was a deeply spiritual act, a physical manifestation of their belonging to God. During this period of healing and recovery, the entire nation was vulnerable, unable to defend themselves should an enemy attack. This vulnerability itself was a profound act of faith, a demonstration of their absolute trust in God's protection. It was a time when the people were completely dependent on their divine shepherd, a stark reminder that their strength did not come from their own might, but from the unwavering presence of the Lord in their midst. The plains around Gilgal, usually bustling with activity, would have been quieter, the usual sounds of daily life subdued, replaced by a sense of communal healing and spiritual renewal. As the men recovered, the reproach of Egypt, the lingering shame of their former bondage and the perceived unfaithfulness that had led to their long wandering, was finally rolled away. This act of circumcision at Gilgal marked a definitive break with their past, a fresh start as a holy nation, fully dedicated to God, ready to enter into their inheritance. The name Gilgal itself, rolling away, became a living testament to this profound spiritual cleansing, a place where their identity was solidified, their covenant renewed, and their future in the Promised Land secured. It was during this time, while they were still encamped at Gilgal, that the Passover was observed. The timing was significant, for it was the 14th day of the first month, the very day their ancestors had celebrated the first Passover in Egypt, just before their miraculous deliverance. Now, 40 years later, they celebrated it again, not as slaves preparing for flight, but as a free people, poised to conquer the land flowing with milk and honey. The preparation for this ancient feast would have filled the camp with a different kind of activity, a joyful anticipation mixed with reverence. Families would have gathered, preparing the unleavened bread, its flat, crisp texture a reminder of their hasty departure from Egypt. The bitter herbs, symbolizing the bitterness of their servitude, would have been collected from the local flora, their pungent aroma filling the air. The Passover lamb, a central element of the feast, would have been carefully selected and prepared according to the ancient rituals, its sacrifice a poignant echo of the original deliverance. The blood, once painted on doorposts in Egypt, now symbolized the covenant and atonement, a sacred offering. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the fertile plains, the camp would have been bathed in the soft glow of countless small fires. The air would have been filled with the hushed sounds of families gathering, the clinking of pottery, the low murmur of blessings, and the quiet chewing of the meal. The taste of the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs, and the roasted lamb would have been more than just food. It would have been a taste of history, a taste of freedom, a taste of promise fulfilled. This Passover at Gilgal was a deeply communal experience, a shared meal that bound them together, not just as families, but as a nation, united by a common history and a shared destiny. Imagine the quiet joy, the profound sense of belonging as they ate together under the vast, star-studded sky, the same stars that had watched over their ancestors in Egypt and later in the wilderness. The sounds would have been gentle, the crackling of fires, the soft rustle of garments, the quiet voices of parents explaining the significance of the meal to their children, their words weaving a tapestry of memory and hope. And then, on the very next day after the Passover, a new chapter began. The manna, the miraculous bread from heaven that had sustained them for 40 years in the wilderness, ceased. For 4 decades, every morning, like dew, it had appeared on the ground, a daily provision from God, a constant reminder of His presence and care. Its sweet, honey-like taste, its light, flaky texture, had been their staple, their daily bread. But now, they were in the land of Canaan, a land of abundance, a land where they could sow and reap, a land that would provide for them from its own rich soil. The cessation of the manna was not a withdrawal of God's provision, but a transition to a new form of blessing. It was a sign that their wilderness journey was truly over, that they had entered the land of promise. Imagine the morning after Passover, the usual expectation of gathering manna, and then the realization that it was no longer there. A quiet understanding would have settled over the camp, a sense of awe at this new phase. Instead, they ate the produce of the land, the rich grains and fruits that grew in the fertile plains of Jericho. The taste of this new food, the yield of the earth, would have been a powerful symbol of their new reality, a taste of the land they were about to inherit. The sounds of the camp would have shifted, perhaps a new energy, a sense of anticipation for the work ahead, the sounds of harvesting and preparing the local bounty. It was during this time, as Joshua walked near Jericho, perhaps surveying the landscape, contemplating the daunting task ahead, that he encountered a figure. The sun might have been setting, casting long, golden light across the fields, or perhaps it was early morning, the air still cool and fresh, carrying the scent of dew and distant flowers. He looked up, and there, standing before him, was a man, sword drawn in his hand. The sight would have been startling, a sudden, unexpected presence in the quiet solitude of his thoughts. Joshua, ever the military leader, ever vigilant, approached him directly, his voice firm. "Are you for us, or for our adversaries?" The question was direct, born of the immediate need to understand friend or foe in this new, potentially hostile land. The man's response, however, was not what Joshua might have expected. "No," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." This was no ordinary man. The air around him might have seemed to shimmer slightly, or perhaps a profound stillness fell over the landscape, silencing the chirping of insects and the rustle of leaves. Joshua, with a deep understanding of divine encounters, immediately recognized the significance of this moment. He fell on his face to the ground and worshipped, a gesture of profound reverence and submission. His question then was simple, humble, and full of faith. "What does my Lord say to his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army then gave a command, echoing the sacred instruction given to Moses at the burning bush, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." The earth beneath Joshua's feet, the very soil of Canaan, was sanctified by this divine presence. Imagine the feeling of the cool earth against his bare soles, a grounding sensation, a physical connection to the sacredness of the moment. The air might have felt charged, thick with an unseen power, yet also profoundly peaceful. This encounter was a powerful affirmation for Joshua, a direct communication from the divine general who would lead them in the battles to come. It was a reminder that the true commander of Israel's forces was not Joshua himself, but the Lord of hosts, the God who had brought them out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, across the Jordan, and into this promised land. The presence of this divine commander would have instilled in Joshua a renewed sense of courage, a quiet confidence that despite the formidable challenges ahead, they would not be fighting alone. The sounds of the approaching evening, the distant call of a bird, the gentle rustle of leaves, would have faded into the background, leaving only the profound stillness of this sacred conversation, a moment of profound spiritual communion that would shape the battles to come, a quiet assurance that the Lord was indeed with them, leading the way, preparing the path, as the last light of day began to fade, painting the sky in soft hues of lavender and rose, promising the dawn of a new day, a day of monumental change, a day that would etch itself into the very bedrock of their collective memory for generations yet unborn. As the first faint blush of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, a soft, ethereal glow emerging from beyond the distant hills of Moab, Joshua rose from his quiet contemplation. The air was still cool, carrying the damp scent of the river and the earthy aroma of the camp, a mixture of wood smoke from dying fires and the faint, sweet smell of the desert flora beginning to awaken. He could hear the stirrings of the camp, the low murmur of voices, the rustle of cloth as people began to prepare themselves for the day, a day unlike any they had known since the Red Sea parted. He sent forth his officers, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth, to move quietly among the tribes. Their message was clear, delivered in hushed tones that carried the weight of divine instruction. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. The instruction was precise, designed to instill order and reverence. There was to be a space, a significant distance, between the ark and the people, approximately 2,000 cubits, a measure that would have felt like a considerable stretch of open ground, perhaps 1,000 paces or so, ensuring that all could see the sacred object and understand its pivotal role in their journey. This distance was not merely for practical viewing, it was a profound symbol of the ark's holiness, a buffer between the divine presence and the mortal multitude, a reminder of the sacred boundary that separated them from the very essence of God. The morning light grew stronger, filtering through the sparse trees and casting long, soft shadows across the encampment. The sounds of preparation intensified, though still subdued, a symphony of anticipation. The clinking of metal on leather as harnesses were adjusted, the low bleating of a stray goat, the rhythmic thud of tent pegs being pulled from the earth, all blended into a quiet hum that spoke of a vast community preparing for an unprecedented move. The air, initially cool, began to warm, promising a clear, bright day, the kind of day that often followed a crisp desert night, where the sun rises with an almost immediate intensity, burning off the last vestiges of the morning chill. Joshua then spoke directly to the people, his voice carrying across the gathered multitude, not with booming authority, but with a calm, steady resonance that commanded attention. "Sanctify yourselves," he instructed, "for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." This call to sanctification was a familiar ritual, a spiritual cleansing, a preparation of heart and mind for a divine encounter. It would have involved ceremonial washing, perhaps a change into clean garments, a period of quiet reflection and prayer, turning their thoughts away from the mundane concerns of travel and towards the extraordinary event that lay ahead. It was a moment for each individual to quiet their own spirit, to shed the anxieties of the past and open themselves to the miraculous intervention promised by their God. The word wonders hung in the air, a whisper of the impossible, a promise of a spectacle that would defy the natural order of things, a testament to the power of the one who led them. As the sun climbed higher, casting a golden sheen upon the river's surface, Joshua turned his attention to the priests. These were the descendants of Levi, set apart for sacred service, and among them, those of the lineage of Aaron, designated to carry the most holy objects. "Take up the Ark of the Covenant," he commanded, his voice imbued with the solemnity of the moment, "and pass on before the people." The priests, dressed in their distinctive linen garments, would have approached the sacred tent, the Mishkan, where the ark resided. The ark itself, a gilded wooden chest, approximately 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide and high, meticulously crafted according to divine specifications given to Moses on Mount Sinai, was covered with a veil, as was the custom when it was moved. It was not to be looked upon directly by the common people, its holiness too potent for ordinary sight. The long staves, made of acacia wood overlaid with gold, would have been slid through the rings on its sides, allowing it to be carried on the shoulders of the priests, a burden of immense spiritual weight. The Levites, chosen for this specific, sacred task, would have felt the gravity of their role, the cool, smooth wood of the staves resting upon their shoulders, the subtle shift of the ark's weight as they began to move. Their steps would have been measured, deliberate, each footfall a prayer, a silent acknowledgement of the divine presence they bore. They were the vanguard, the living bridge between the people and their God, carrying the very symbol of the covenant into the unknown. The scene would have been one of profound silence, broken only by the soft shuffling of feet and the gentle murmur of the river. The vast multitude, estimated to be hundreds of thousands, perhaps even 1 million or more, would have watched with bated breath as the priests, bearing the ark, began their slow, majestic procession towards the Jordan. The distance between the ark and the people was maintained, a visible gap that underscored the sacredness of the moment. The people would have been arranged by tribes, each under its own banner, a disciplined and organized host, a testament to the decades of wilderness training under Moses. Their eyes, though, would have been fixed on that small, sacred object, glinting faintly in the morning sun, moving steadily towards the water's edge. The Jordan River, at this time of year, during the harvest season, was typically at its fullest, swollen by the melting snows from Mount Hermon and the Galilean mountains. It would have been a formidable barrier, a wide, churning expanse of muddy, fast-flowing water, often overflowing its banks. The banks themselves would have been thick with reeds and dense vegetation, making access difficult, the ground soft and treacherous. The roar of the water, a constant, powerful sound, would have filled the air, a natural barrier that seemed insurmountable. One could almost feel the spray in the air, the dampness clinging to the leaves of the riverine trees, the earthy smell of the rich, alluvial soil. As the priests, with the ark resting on their shoulders, reached the very brink of the river, their feet would have touched the cold, swirling water. The sensation would have been immediate, the chill seeping through their sandals, the current tugging at their robes. And then, the impossible began to unfold. The water, which had been rushing downstream with relentless force, suddenly began to pile up, to stand still as a wall far upstream, near a town called Adam, which lay beside Zarethan. The effect would have been gradual yet undeniable, a slow, majestic cessation of the river's flow. The roar of the current would have diminished, replaced by an eerie, growing silence, as if the very breath of the river had been held. Downstream, towards the Dead Sea, the waters continued to flow away, emptying out, leaving behind a vast expanse of dry ground. The transformation would have been breathtaking, or inspiring. Where moments before there had been a raging torrent, now there was a wide, open pathway, the riverbed exposed, revealing the smooth, worn stones and the muddy bottom, perhaps still glistening with residual moisture. The air would have been thick with the scent of wet earth and the lingering freshness of the river, but now without the sound of its rushing power. The priests, carrying the ark, would have stepped further into the dry riverbed, their feet finding solid purchase on the newly revealed ground. They would have walked to the very center of the river, standing firm, their presence a silent anchor for the miraculous event. The ark, the visible sign of God's presence, was literally at the heart of this impossible crossing. Imagine the sun, now high above, glinting off the gold of the ark, illuminating the faces of the priests, their expressions a mixture of profound reverence and quiet astonishment. The sheer scale of the event, the vastness of the exposed riverbed, the towering wall of water held back upstream, would have been a sight that defied all earthly explanation. Then Joshua gave the command, his voice echoing across the now silent riverbed, carrying to the waiting multitude on the eastern bank. Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan. And the people began to move. The sheer logistics of moving such a vast number of people would have been immense. They would have descended from the eastern bank, a slow, steady stream of humanity, their footsteps now audible on the dry ground of the riverbed, a soft, rhythmic shuffling that filled the air. The dust, disturbed by their passage, would have risen in soft clouds, catching the sunlight, creating a hazy, almost dreamlike atmosphere. Families would have moved together, parents guiding their children, the older ones perhaps holding the hands of the younger, their faces a mixture of wonder and quiet determination. The younger children, perhaps initially bewildered by the sudden silence of the river and the strange, open pathway, would have looked up at their parents for reassurance, their small hands clutching tightly. The elders, those who had seen the parting of the Red Sea decades ago, would have recognized the hand of God in this new miracle, a powerful echo of their liberation from Egypt. For them, it would have been a profound reaffirmation of God's faithfulness, a tangible link between the past and the present, a promise of the future. The crossing would have taken hours, a continuous flow of people, livestock, and belongings. The air would have been filled with the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the soft clatter of cooking pots and water skins. The ground beneath their feet, though dry, would have been uneven, a mosaic of pebbles, larger stones, and patches of dried mud, requiring careful footing. Yet, there would have been no panic, no disorder, only a steady, purposeful movement, guided by the visible presence of the ark and the unwavering stance of the priests in the center. The sun would have continued its journey across the sky, marking the passage of time. The initial awe might have settled into a quiet, almost meditative rhythm of walking, one foot in front of the other, across the miraculous dry land. The wall of water upstream, held back by an unseen force, would have remained an astonishing spectacle, a constant reminder of the divine power at work. The scent of the riverbed, a unique blend of damp earth, mineral deposits, and perhaps the faint, sweet smell of river reeds, would have been distinct, an olfactory memory that would forever be associated with this momentous crossing. As each tribe, each family, each individual stepped onto the western bank, they would have felt the solid ground of the promised land beneath their feet for the very first time. This was not the wilderness, not the barren expanse of the desert they had known for 40 years. This was the land flowing with milk and honey, the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land for which their ancestors had yearned. The feeling would have been one of profound relief, of arrival, of destiny fulfilled. The air on the western bank might have felt different, perhaps a little warmer, a little richer, carrying the scent of fertile soil and the promise of abundant harvests. Once all the people had safely crossed, Joshua instructed 12 men, one from each tribe, to return to the center of the Jordan, to the very spot where the priests with the ark had stood. Take up for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priests' feet stood firm, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. This act was not merely symbolic, it was a concrete, tangible command, designed to create a lasting memorial. These were not just any stones, they were stones from the very bed of the river, stones that had been submerged for countless years, now exposed by a divine act. They would have been smooth, perhaps rounded by the relentless flow of the water, cool and heavy in the hands of the men who carried them. The 12 men, their shoulders burdened with these heavy stones, would have made their way back across the dry riverbed, rejoining the multitude on the western side. Their task was to erect a monument, a silent witness to the miracle, a teaching tool for future generations. The questions from their children, "What do these stones mean to you?" would be answered with the story of the Jordan's parting, of God's mighty hand leading his people into their inheritance. Finally, with all the people safely across, and the memorial stones gathered, Joshua gave the signal. The priests, who had stood firm in the middle of the Jordan, their feet planted on the dry ground, bearing the sacred ark for what must have felt like an eternity, began to ascend from the riverbed. Their steps would have been slow, deliberate, their faces perhaps etched with a quiet exhaustion, but also with an undeniable sense of triumph and profound gratitude. As their feet touched the western bank, the very moment they were clear of the riverbed, the waters of the Jordan, as if released from an invisible dam, rushed back to their place. The roar returned, the powerful current once again filled the channel, overflowing its banks as it had before, reclaiming its domain. The transformation was complete, the pathway gone, the river once again a formidable barrier. The sound of the rushing water would have been a powerful counterpoint to the earlier silence, a dramatic punctuation mark to the miraculous event. The people, now safely on the western bank, would have turned to witness the river's return, a final, undeniable confirmation of the wonder they had just experienced. The air would have been filled with the spray of the water, the familiar scent of the river now imbued with the memory of the impossible. That day, the 10th day of the first month, they encamped at Gilgal, on the eastern border of Jericho. Gilgal, a name that would come to mean rolling away, would become their first base in the Promised Land, a place of spiritual significance where the reproach of Egypt would be rolled away from them. There, in that new land, under the vast, open sky, they would set up the 12 stones taken from the Jordan. The sun would have begun its descent, casting long, purple shadows across the newly established camp, illuminating the freshly placed stones, a silent testament to the day's extraordinary events. The air would have been filled with the sounds of a camp settling in, the low hum of conversation, the crackle of new fires being lit, the distant bleating of sheep, all under the watchful gaze of the newly arrived moon, a silver disk hanging in the velvet sky, reflecting the quiet awe of a people who had just walked through the impossible, led by the hand of their God, into a land of promise, a land of new beginnings, where the scent of the fertile earth mingled with the lingering memory of the miraculous crossing, and the gentle sounds of the night began to envelop them, drawing them into a deep and peaceful rest as the stars slowly emerged, one by one, in the vast expanse of the heavens, a silent, glittering canopy over their new home, promising a future filled with both challenges and blessings, a future they would face with the quiet assurance that the same God who had parted the waters of the Jordan would continue to lead them, to guide their steps through the valleys and over the hills, towards the destiny He had laid out for them, a destiny woven into the very fabric of their history, a narrative of faith and perseverance, under the gentle glow of the moon, as the night deepened and the world around them settled into a profound stillness, a stillness that invited contemplation and a peaceful surrender to the quiet rhythms of the earth, a deep, restorative stillness that carried the whispers of ancient promises and the soft murmur of the wind through the olive trees, a gentle lullaby for a people at rest, their journey temporarily paused, their hearts filled with a quiet wonder as the night embraced them, and the world slowly, softly, drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. As the first faint blush of dawn, a soft, pearlescent grey, began to paint the eastern sky, stretching its delicate fingers over the distant Moabite hills, a hush still lay heavy upon the Israelite camp, a vast, sprawling city of tents that had sprung up almost overnight on the plains of Shittim. The air, cool and still from the night, carried the faint, earthy scent of damp canvas and the lingering aroma of cooking fires from the evening before, now just smoldering embers beneath a thin layer of ash. A few early risers, perhaps stirred by the growing light or the subtle shift in the breeze, might have emerged from their tents, stretching slowly, their figures silhouetted against the brightening horizon, their breath misting faintly in the cool morning air. The distant, barely perceptible chirping of unseen birds began to weave itself into the silence, a gentle, tentative melody that hinted at the day's awakening. Soon, the camp began to stir more purposefully, a ripple of quiet activity spreading from tent to tent, like water slowly warming in a vast, shallow basin. The soft clatter of cooking pots, the low murmur of voices, the rustle of clothing, and the gentle bleating of a few sheep or goats began to replace the profound stillness of the night. Children, still half asleep, might have been seen rubbing their eyes, their small hands reaching for a piece of unleavened bread, while their parents quietly prepared for the day, their movements practiced and economical after 40 years of nomadic life. A faint, sweet smell of roasting grain might have begun to drift through the air, mingling with the fresh scent of dew-kissed earth. Joshua, too, would have risen with the dawn, his mind already turning to the momentous task that lay before them. Perhaps he stood for a long moment outside his tent, feeling the cool morning air on his face, watching the sun slowly climb above the horizon, casting long, slender shadows across the plains. He would have observed the vast multitude, the hundreds of thousands of souls entrusted to his care, their hopes and fears palpable in the quiet morning light. The weight of leadership, a mantle passed down from Moses, rested heavily yet steadily upon his shoulders, a responsibility he carried with a deep, quiet resolve. 3 days had passed since the command had been given, 3 days of preparation and anticipation, a period of waiting that must have felt both endless and fleeting. During this time, the people had been instructed to consecrate themselves, to set themselves apart, to purify their hearts and minds for the sacred event that was about to unfold. This act of consecration, a familiar ritual from their wilderness wanderings, involved washing their clothes, abstaining from certain activities, and focusing their thoughts on the divine presence that guided them. It was a physical manifestation of an inner readiness, a way of preparing their entire being for an encounter with the Holy. Now, on this fourth morning, as the sun began to warm the plains, casting a golden glow over the tents, Joshua gave the command. The officers, men of experience and trust, moved through the camp, their voices low but clear, relaying Joshua's instructions. The order was given, "When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and follow it." This was a departure from their usual marching order. For 40 years, the Ark had often been carried in the midst of the camp, a sacred centerpiece. But now, it was to go before them, leading the way, a visible sign of God's direct guidance into the unknown. A distance was to be maintained, about 2,000 cubits by measure, which would have been roughly half a mile, a significant space. This separation served multiple purposes. It ensured that all the people, even those at the very back of the vast procession, would be able to see the Ark, a powerful symbol of God's presence. It also underscored the sacredness of the Ark, emphasizing that it was not to be approached casually, but with reverence and awe. The space created a visual pathway, a clear line of sight for the hundreds of thousands who would follow, a tangible representation of the divine leading the human. The air thrummed with a quiet energy, a mixture of anticipation and perhaps a touch of apprehension. Whispers would have passed through the ranks, hushed conversations about what lay ahead. The Jordan River, though not an insurmountable barrier in itself, was known to be at its fullest during this season, the time of the barley harvest, typically in late March or early April. The melting snows from the peaks of Mount Hermon, far to the north, would swell its banks, transforming the usually meandering river into a rushing, powerful torrent, often overflowing its lower banks. This was not a small stream to be waded through, it was a formidable natural obstacle, a wide, deep, and fast-flowing river. The people had been told, "You shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites." This promise, reiterated by Joshua, was a powerful reassurance, a reminder of the divine power that had brought them this far. It was a promise not just of passage, but of conquest, a declaration that their long journey was nearing its ultimate purpose. As the sun climbed higher, casting a warm, golden light across the plains, the camp began to dismantle itself with practiced efficiency. Tents were carefully folded, cooking implements packed, and livestock gathered. The sounds of preparation were a symphony of quiet industry, the rustle of canvas, the soft thud of tent poles being stowed, the lowing of cattle, the occasional cry of a child, all blending into a steady hum that filled the morning air. The dust, fine and reddish-brown, began to rise in soft clouds, catching the sunlight as thousands of feet moved across the dry earth. Then the moment arrived. The priests, specifically the Kohathite Levites, who were uniquely tasked with carrying the holiest objects, emerged from their designated area. They were dressed in their sacred vestments, perhaps the simple white linen tunics prescribed for their service, their movements deliberate and solemn. On their shoulders they bore the staves of acacia wood overlaid with gold, from which hung the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark itself, a rectangular chest of acacia wood, covered inside and out with pure gold, with its golden lid, the mercy seat, and the two cherubim with outstretched wings, was the most sacred object in all of Israel. It contained the tablets of the law, a pot of manna, and Aaron's rod that had budded, tangible reminders of God's covenant and miraculous provision. The sight of the ark, gleaming faintly in the morning sun, would have sent a ripple of profound reverence through the assembled multitude. It was not merely a box, it was the very symbol of God's presence among them, the focal point of their worship, the tangible representation of the invisible, all-powerful deity who had led them through the wilderness. A hush fell over the camp once more, a different kind of hush, one born of awe and expectation. Slowly, deliberately, the priests began to move forward, their pace measured and steady. The 4 poles, extending from the ark, rested on their shoulders, their steps synchronized, their faces set with a quiet determination. Behind them, at the prescribed distance, came the vast host of Israel, a river of humanity stretching back as far as the eye could see. The sun, now higher in the sky, beat down gently, warming the air, and the dust rose in a continuous, soft cloud behind them, a golden haze that softened the edges of the distant horizon. They marched eastward, towards the Jordan River, which lay perhaps a few miles away, a shimmering line of blue-green visible in the distance. The landscape they traversed was part of the Arabah, the great rift valley that stretches from the Sea of Galilee down to the Gulf of Aqaba. It was a land of dry, dusty plains, often punctuated by low hills and wadis, or dry riverbeds, that would fill with water during the rainy season. The air would have been dry, carrying the faint, earthy scent of sun-baked soil and sparse desert vegetation. The sounds of their march were muted, a rhythmic shuffling of feet, the occasional lowing of an animal, the soft murmur of voices, all overshadowed by the quiet, steady presence of the ark leading the way. As they drew closer to the Jordan, the sounds of the river would have begun to reach them, a low, persistent rumble that grew steadily louder. The Jordan, at this point, would have been a formidable sight. Its banks, usually well-defined, would have been submerged, the river overflowing into the surrounding floodplains, creating a wider, more treacherous expanse of water. The water itself, fed by the melting snows, would have been cold, swift, and muddy, carrying sediment from the northern mountains, a powerful, swirling force. The sight of it, wide and rushing, must have stirred a mixture of wonder and trepidation in the hearts of the people. How would they cross this? There were no bridges, no ferries, no easy fords visible in the swollen expanse. Joshua, his gaze fixed on the river ahead, knew the answer. He had received the divine instruction, a plan that defied natural explanation, a demonstration of power that would leave no doubt as to the source of their strength. he had gathered the priests and given them the final, crucial command: as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from upstream, and they shall stand in a heap. This was the moment of truth, the ultimate test of faith. The priests, bearing the holiest object, were to step into the raging torrent, trusting in a promise that seemed to defy all logic and natural law. Their faith was to be the catalyst, the trigger for the miraculous intervention. The weight of the ark on their shoulders, the cold spray of the river on their faces, the roar of the water in their ears, all these sensory details would have intensified the gravity of the moment. As the leading edge of the vast procession reached the riverbank, a collective gasp might have rippled through the crowd. The sheer power of the water, its relentless rush, was undeniable. The air would have been cooler near the river, damp with the mist rising from the churning water, carrying the fresh, earthy smell of wet soil and river vegetation. The sun, now high overhead, glinted off the turbulent surface of the water, creating a dazzling, almost blinding spectacle. The priests, their faces perhaps etched with a mixture of solemnity and awe, did not hesitate. Their footsteps, slow and deliberate, carried them to the very edge of the water. They lowered their feet, one after another, into the cold, swirling current. The water, initially, would have closed around their ankles, then their calves, tugging at their robes, threatening to pull them downstream. But they held firm, their grip on the ark's staves unwavering, their eyes fixed forward, their hearts perhaps beating a little faster, but their resolve unyielding. And then, it happened. Not with a sudden, violent crash, but with a gradual, almost imperceptible slowing, a deepening quiet that spread across the river. The waters that flowed down from upstream, from the north, began to recede, to pile up, to stand in a single, solid mass far off, at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. This distant piling up of water would have been an astonishing sight, a wall of water rising against the natural flow, held back by an unseen hand. The name Adam is significant, a town located near the confluence of the Jordan and the Jabbok rivers, roughly 18 to 20 miles north of where the Israelites were crossing. This distance meant that a vast stretch of the riverbed, many miles long, would be laid bare. As the upstream waters receded, the downstream waters, those already between the priests and the Dead Sea, continued to flow away, emptying into the vast, salty expanse. The riverbed, once submerged, began to emerge, slowly at first, then more rapidly, revealing the dark, muddy bottom, strewn with rocks and debris carried by the current over countless seasons. The roar of the rushing water diminished, replaced by a profound, almost eerie silence, broken only by the gasps of the people and the distant, fading murmur of the receding water. The priests, standing firm with the ark, found themselves not in rushing water, but on dry ground. The mud, initially soft and clinging, would have quickly firmed up under the divine intervention, becoming a solid, walkable surface. The air, once damp with river mist, would have felt drier, still carrying the scent of damp earth, but now mingled with the faint, warm smell of sun-baked mud. Joshua then commanded the people, "Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan." And so, the vast multitude began to move. The sound of their footsteps, initially soft and tentative on the newly revealed riverbed, grew into a steady, rhythmic shuffle. The sun, now high and bright, shone down on the extraordinary scene, a nation, hundreds of thousands strong, walking through the heart of a river that had, moments before, been a raging torrent. The sight of the dry riverbed, stretching from bank to bank, with the wall of water held back far to the north, and the river emptying out to the south, must have been an indelible image, burned into the memory of every man, woman, and child present. It was a tangible, undeniable proof of God's power, a miracle on a scale that rivaled the parting of the Red Sea, an event that many of them had only heard about from their parents and grandparents. Now, they were witnesses, participants in their own miraculous crossing. The air would have been filled with a mixture of awe, wonder, and perhaps a quiet, reverent joy. Children, wide-eyed, might have pointed at the strange, exposed riverbed, perhaps picking up a smooth stone as a memento. The older generations, those who had seen the Red Sea parted, might have exchanged knowing glances, their hearts filled with renewed faith and gratitude. The younger ones, who had only known the wilderness, now saw with their own eyes that the God of their fathers was indeed a living, powerful God, faithful to his promises. The crossing was not a hurried dash, but a steady, orderly procession. The sheer number of people meant that it would have taken many hours, perhaps even an entire day, for everyone to pass over. The sun would have tracked across the sky, casting long shadows, then shortening them, then lengthening them again as the day wore on. The dust, stirred by countless feet, would have risen in a continuous, golden cloud, softening the edges of the distant hills and creating a hazy, dreamlike atmosphere. The priests, with the Ark of the Covenant, remained standing firm in the middle of the Jordan, their feet planted on the dry ground, a constant, unwavering presence. They were the anchor, the focal point of the miracle, holding the divine presence steady while the entire nation passed by. Their robes, perhaps still damp from the initial contact with the water, would have dried in the warm air, but their posture remained one of steadfast vigilance. The weight of the ark, usually a physical burden, must have felt lighter, buoyed by the profound significance of their role. As the last of the people made their way across the riverbed and ascended the western bank onto the plains of Jericho, Joshua gave another command. He instructed 12 men, one from each tribe, to go back into the middle of the Jordan, to the very spot where the priests stood with the ark. Each man was to take a large stone from that place, a stone that could be carried on his shoulder, and bring it out to the western bank. These 12 stones were to serve as a memorial, a lasting testament to the miraculous event. The men would have descended back into the dry riverbed, their footsteps echoing slightly in the strange, open space. They would have chosen their stones carefully, perhaps feeling the smooth, water-worn surfaces, each stone a tangible piece of the miracle. The effort of carrying these heavy stones back up the bank would have been a physical reminder of the event, a burden that solidified the memory. These stones, once brought out, were to be set up at their first encampment on the western side of the Jordan, which would be Gilgal. They were to be a sign, a visible marker for future generations. When children, in years to come, would ask their parents, "What do these stones mean to you?" the story of the Jordan crossing would be recounted, ensuring that the memory of God's faithfulness and power would never fade. It was a way of embedding the miracle into the very landscape, a silent sermon in stone. Once the 12 men had retrieved their stones, and the entire nation had safely crossed over, Joshua gave the final command to the priests. Slowly, deliberately, they began to ascend from the middle of the Jordan, still bearing the Ark of the Covenant. As their feet, bearing the sacred Ark, touched the western bank, the waters of the Jordan, which had been held back in that miraculous wall far to the north, began to flow again. Not with a sudden, violent surge, but with a gradual, inexorable return to their natural course. The distant wall of water would have begun to collapse, sending a fresh, powerful rush down the riverbed. The sound of the rushing water, absent for hours, would have returned, growing steadily louder, filling the air once more. The riverbed, so recently dry and exposed, would have been swiftly covered again, the muddy bottom disappearing beneath the cold, swirling currents. The Jordan, in a matter of moments, was restored to its full, overflowing banks, as if the miracle had never happened, leaving behind only the witness of the people and the 12 stones on the bank. The Israelites, now safely on the plains of Jericho, looked back at the swiftly flowing river, their hearts filled with a profound sense of awe and gratitude. They had truly entered the Promised Land. The 40 years of wandering were over. The wilderness was behind them. Before them lay the land flowing with milk and honey, a land of new challenges, but also of incredible promise. The sun, now beginning its slow descent towards the western horizon, cast long, golden shadows across the plains, illuminating the newly established camp at Gilgal. The air, still carrying the faint scent of damp earth from the river, was filled with the quiet murmur of a people settling in, their journey's most formidable natural barrier overcome, their faith deepened by the undeniable evidence of God's mighty hand. The soft evening breeze began to rustle through the sparse vegetation, carrying the quiet sounds of a camp at rest, a gentle symphony of new beginnings and ancient promises, as the day slowly, softly, drifted towards a peaceful night, a deep, velvety darkness settling over the plains of Moab. As the last slivers of light surrendered to the encroaching night, a profound stillness descended upon the Israelite camp, a quiet anticipation humming beneath the surface of their weary bodies. The air, which had been warm and dry throughout the day, now carried a subtle coolness, a gentle breath from the distant mountains, hinting at the approaching dawn. The scent of wood smoke, faint and comforting, mingled with the earthy aroma of the parched ground and the lingering sweetness of the manna that had sustained them for so long, a familiar perfume of their desert journey. Stars, like countless scattered diamonds, began to emerge, piercing the inky canvas of the sky, each one a tiny, distant beacon in the vast expanse above, mirroring the quiet wonder in the hearts of the people below. Joshua, after a day filled with the weighty responsibilities of leadership and the solemn pronouncements from the divine, found a quiet moment for reflection, perhaps by a small, flickering oil lamp within his tent, its soft glow casting long, dancing shadows on the canvas walls. He would have felt the immense burden of the task ahead, the colossal undertaking of leading an entire nation across a formidable river and into a land teeming with unknown challenges. Yet, beneath that weight, there was an unwavering current of faith, a deep-seated trust in the promises that had been passed down through generations, from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through Moses, and now, entrusted to him. He might have traced the familiar lines of a map drawn on a piece of parchment, or simply gazed into the flickering flame, imagining the contours of the land beyond the Jordan, a land described as flowing with milk and honey, a place of verdant valleys and ancient olive groves, a stark contrast to the barren, sun-baked landscapes they had known for 40 long years. The command had been clear, delivered with an authority that resonated deep within his soul: "Tomorrow you shall cross the Jordan." The word "tomorrow" hung in the air, pregnant with destiny, a single word that would forever alter the course of their history. He would have considered the practicalities, the logistics of moving perhaps 2 million people, their livestock, their tents, their precious Ark of the Covenant, all across a river known for its unpredictable currents and its propensity to swell during the harvest season, which was precisely the time they were now facing. The Jordan, at this time of year, fed by the melting snows from Mount Hermon, would have been at its fullest, its waters rushing with an impressive, almost intimidating force, a wide, churning ribbon of brown and gray, carrying sediment and debris from its long journey. As the night deepened, the sounds of the camp slowly faded, replaced by the gentle hum of insects, the occasional distant cry of a nocturnal bird, and the rhythmic breathing of a sleeping multitude. The air grew cooler still, inviting a deeper, more profound rest. Yet, for many, sleep would have been elusive, their minds racing with thoughts of the morrow, of the unknown, of the sheer audacity of the journey they were about to embark upon. They would have whispered stories to their children, tales of the Red Sea parting, of manna from heaven, of water from a rock, weaving these miraculous narratives into the fabric of their family histories, reinforcing the belief that the God who had done these things before would surely do them again. The first faint blush of dawn, a delicate wash of rose and gold, began to paint the eastern sky, slowly chasing away the lingering shadows of the night. A new day, a day of immense significance, was unfolding. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the fresh scent of dew-kissed earth and the faint, sweet aroma of wild herbs growing along the riverbanks. A gentle mist, like a soft, ethereal veil, might have hung low over the Jordan Valley, shrouding the distant hills in an enigmatic haze, adding to the sense of mystery and wonder that permeated the early morning. Joshua, having risen before the sun, would have felt the quiet stirrings of the camp, the soft murmurs of awakening, the rustle of cloth, the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, all gradually building into a symphony of preparation. He would have given the command for the officers to go throughout the camp, delivering the final instructions, their voices calm and steady, carrying the weight of their leader's unwavering resolve. The message was simple, yet profound: when you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. This instruction was crucial, a deliberate act of faith and obedience. The Ark, a sacred chest overlaid with gold, containing the tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod, and a pot of manna, was not merely a symbol, it was the tangible representation of God's presence among them, the very heart of their covenant relationship. It was to lead the way, not just as a guide, but as a declaration of God's active participation in their journey. The priests, specifically chosen from the tribe of Levi, consecrated for sacred service, would carry it on poles made of acacia wood, their steps measured and solemn, their faces perhaps reflecting a mixture of awe and trepidation. The people were also instructed to maintain a specific distance from the ark, about 2,000 cubits by measure, which would be roughly 1/2 a mile. This distance served multiple purposes. It allowed everyone in the vast multitude to see the ark, ensuring that even those at the very back could witness its progress and know the direction they were to follow. It also underscored the ark's holiness, emphasizing the reverence due to God's presence, creating a sacred space around it, a respectful buffer between the divine and the human. This separation would have instilled a sense of awe, a quiet understanding of the sacredness of the moment. As the sun climbed higher, its golden rays piercing through the morning mist, the camp began to move with a quiet, purposeful energy. Tents were meticulously taken down, their canvas carefully folded, poles gathered, and personal belongings packed onto donkeys and carts. The air filled with the quiet sounds of preparation, the soft clinking of pottery, the gentle creak of leather, the hushed conversations of families, the occasional whimper of a child, quickly soothed by a parent's comforting embrace. The scent of breakfast fires, burning down to embers, mingled with the fresh morning air, a final taste of the familiar before venturing into the unknown. The priests, dressed in their sacred vestments, their movements deliberate and reverent, approached the ark. They would have carefully lifted it, feeling its substantial weight, the polished wood of the poles smooth beneath their hands. The golden cherubim on its lid, facing each other with outstretched wings, seemed to gaze forward, leading the way. As they began to move, a profound hush fell over the vast assembly. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic padding of their bare feet on the dusty ground and the gentle creak of the ark's poles, a sound that resonated deep within the hearts of the waiting Israelites. Slowly, majestically, the procession began. First, the priests bearing the ark, their eyes fixed forward, their steps steady. Behind them, at the prescribed distance, followed the vast multitude of Israel, tribe by tribe, family by family, a living river of humanity stretching as far as the eye could see. The sheer scale of the movement would have been breathtaking, a testament to the power of a united people moving with a singular purpose, guided by an unseen hand. The sun, now fully risen, cast long, shifting shadows across the plain, illuminating the dust kicked up by thousands of feet, creating a hazy, golden glow around the moving column. They approached the banks of the Jordan, a river that, at this time of year, would have been a formidable barrier. The banks would have been muddy and slippery, perhaps overgrown with reeds and thickets, the water itself a turbulent, rushing torrent, its surface swirling with eddies and currents. The roar of the water, a constant, powerful sound, would have filled the air, a natural symphony of raw power. The people would have gazed at it, perhaps with a mixture of hope and apprehension, their faith being tested by the tangible reality of the obstacle before them. Joshua, standing perhaps at the very edge of the water, his gaze fixed on the churning expanse, would have felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of 40 years of wandering, of promises made and now, finally, about to be fulfilled. He would have heard the quiet murmurs of the crowd behind him, the soft shuffling of feet, the occasional lowing of an animal, all waiting, watching, holding their breath. The air would have been thick with anticipation, a palpable energy vibrating through the entire assembly. Then, the command came, delivered with quiet authority, yet carrying the force of divine instruction. As soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from upstream, and they shall stand as a heap. This was the moment of truth, the ultimate test of their faith. The priests, carrying the most sacred object of their nation, were to step into the rushing, overflowing river, not knowing what would happen, trusting solely in the word of God. Their hearts must have pounded, a mixture of fear and profound faith coursing through their veins. They would have felt the cool spray of the river on their faces, heard the insistent roar of the current, seen the swirling brown waters before them. With unwavering resolve, guided by an unseen hand and an inner conviction, the priests, bearing the ark, stepped into the water. The first touch of the cold, swirling current against their feet would have been a shock, a tangible commitment to the miraculous. And then, as their feet settled onto the muddy riverbed, something extraordinary, something utterly impossible by natural means, began to happen. Far upstream, at a place called Adam, a town near Zarethan, the waters that were flowing down from above began to pile up, to stand in a single, solid heap. It was as if an invisible dam had been erected, holding back the immense volume of water, creating an ever-growing wall of liquid. The riverbed before them, moments ago a raging torrent, began to dry, revealing the dark, wet earth, then slowly, miraculously, hardening into firm ground. The sound of the rushing water, which had been so dominant, began to recede, replaced by an eerie, profound silence, broken only by the gasps of awe and wonder from the multitude. The people, watching from the banks, would have been struck speechless, their eyes wide with disbelief and profound reverence. The sight of the river parting, not with a mighty wind like the Red Sea, but with a silent, deliberate halt, was a testament to a power beyond human comprehension. The muddy banks, which had been treacherous, now offered a clear, firm path. The air, which had been heavy with the roar of the water, now carried a hushed reverence, a palpable sense of the sacred. The priests, still standing in the middle of the now dry riverbed, the ark resting securely between them, would have felt the firm ground beneath their feet. They remained there, steadfast and unwavering, a living monument to faith, holding the sacred ark, while the entire nation of Israel began to cross. The crossing was not a frantic rush, but an orderly, deliberate movement, tribe by tribe, family by family, just as they had been instructed. Imagine the scene: thousands upon thousands of people, their animals, their belongings, slowly making their way across the dry bed of the Jordan. The sun, now high in the sky, would have beaten down, warming the exposed riverbed. The air would have been filled with the soft sounds of shuffling feet, the occasional call of a shepherd, the gentle bleating of sheep, the lowing of cattle, all against the backdrop of an almost supernatural silence where the river once roared. The scent of damp earth, newly exposed to the sun, would have mingled with the familiar smell of dust and the faint aroma of the desert. Children, perhaps clutching their parents' hands, would have looked up at the towering wall of water upstream, a shimmering, impossible spectacle, their young minds struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Elders, who had seen the wonders of the Exodus, would have nodded slowly, tears perhaps welling in their eyes, recognizing the familiar hand of God at work once more, fulfilling promises that had seemed so distant for so long. The crossing would have taken many hours, a steady, continuous flow of humanity moving from one side to the other. The ground beneath their feet, though dry, would have been uneven, perhaps still bearing the marks of the river's flow, smooth stones and ancient river debris. The air would have remained hushed, filled with a quiet awe, a profound sense of gratitude and wonder. Each step taken was a step into a new future, a step away from the wilderness and into the promised inheritance. Joshua, ever watchful, would have observed the entire process, his heart filled with a quiet satisfaction, a profound sense of God's faithfulness. He would have seen the faces of his people, reflecting a spectrum of emotions, awe, relief, joy, and a renewed sense of purpose. The sight of the last person, the last animal, safely reaching the western bank would have brought a quiet sigh of relief, a deep sense of accomplishment. Only when every single Israelite had crossed over, when the last straggler had set foot on the western bank, did Joshua give the signal. The priests, who had stood steadfastly in the middle of the Jordan's dry bed, now began to move, carrying the ark towards the western bank. As their feet, bearing the sacred ark, finally touched the dry land on the other side, the miraculous event that had held the river at bay began to reverse. Slowly, majestically, the piled-up waters upstream began to flow again, rushing down the riverbed, reclaiming their ancient course. The roar of the water, which had been silenced for hours, returned, filling the valley with its powerful sound. The dry ground, which had borne the weight of an entire nation, was once more submerged, disappearing beneath the churning, brown waters. It was as if the river had never been interrupted, its flow restored to its natural, powerful rhythm, leaving behind only the indelible memory of a divine intervention. The people, now safely on the western bank, would have watched this final act of the miracle with renewed wonder. The sight of the river returning to its full, formidable state, moments after they had walked across its dry bed, would have cemented the experience in their minds, an undeniable, tangible proof of God's power and his unwavering commitment to his covenant. The air, now filled with the natural sounds of the flowing river, also carried a new kind of energy, a quiet hum of gratitude and anticipation for the land that lay before them. To commemorate this extraordinary event, Joshua commanded that 12 men, one from each tribe, should take 12 stones from the very spot where the priest's feet had stood firm in the middle of the Jordan. These stones, heavy and smooth from the river's flow, were to be carried to their first encampment in the Promised Land and set up as a memorial. This act was not merely symbolic, it was a tangible reminder, a physical testament to the miracle, intended to serve as a teaching tool for future generations. When their children would ask, "What do these stones mean to you?" they would be told the story of how the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the Ark of the Covenant, how their God had dried up the river so that his people could cross on dry ground. The first encampment after crossing the Jordan was at Gilgal, a place that would become significant in their early history in Canaan. The air there would have been different from the desert, perhaps richer, carrying the scent of fertile earth and unfamiliar vegetation. The sounds of the river, though still audible, would have been a comforting backdrop rather than an immediate obstacle. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky with hues of orange and purple, the people would have begun to set up their tents, their movements imbued with a new sense of belonging, a quiet understanding that they had finally arrived. The 12 stones, heavy with meaning, would have been carefully placed, a silent witness to the day's profound events, catching the last golden rays of the setting sun. The night that followed would have been filled with a deep, peaceful sleep for many, a rest earned after years of wandering and a day of immense significance. The sounds of the camp would have been softer, more settled, a symphony of contentment. The air, cool and fresh, would have carried the subtle scent of the new land, a promise of abundance. The stars, now familiar companions, would have twinkled above, their light reflecting off the smooth surfaces of the memorial stones, silent sentinels watching over a nation that had just stepped into its destiny. The quiet murmurs of the Jordan River, flowing steadily in the distance, would have been a constant, gentle reminder of the day's miraculous passage, a soft lullaby for the weary souls, as the land itself seemed to breathe a sigh of welcome, embracing its new inhabitants under the vast, watchful canopy of the desert sky. As the first blush of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon, a soft, pearlescent light spreading slowly across the rugged terrain, Joshua, his spirit still resonating with the profound awe of the crossing, gave a new instruction to the people, his voice carrying softly across the encampment, a gentle ripple in the morning stillness. He called for 12 men, one from each of the tribes, to return to the very heart of the Jordan, to the place where the priest's feet had stood firm, holding back the mighty waters, a place now dry and firm, but only moments before a rushing torrent. These men were to retrieve 12 stones, large enough to be carried on a shoulder, stones that had lain for untold centuries beneath the river's flow, now exposed to the cool morning air. Imagine the scene, the sun just beginning to warm the air, chasing away the last vestiges of the night's chill, as these 12 representatives, perhaps still feeling the dampness of the riverbed on their sandals, made their way back to the central channel. The ground beneath their feet, though dry, would have retained a certain coolness, a faint scent of damp earth and river silt rising as they walked. The air itself might have carried the faint, earthy smell of the recently exposed riverbed, a scent mingling with the dry, clean aroma of the desert and the distant, subtle perfume of wild herbs beginning to stir in the morning breeze. They would have chosen their stones carefully, not just any stone, but ones that felt significant, perhaps smoothed by the ceaseless flow of water, or uniquely shaped, each a silent witness to the miracle that had unfolded. The weight of these stones on their shoulders would have been substantial, a tangible reminder of the task, a physical connection to the sacred ground. They carried these heavy, water-worn stones back to the new encampment at Gilgal, a place whose name itself, meaning circle of stones or rolling away, would soon become deeply significant, a place that would serve as a primary base for the Israelites for some time. Gilgal was situated on the eastern edge of the plains of Jericho, a landscape that would have presented a stark contrast to the barren wilderness they had so recently traversed. Here, the land was flatter, more fertile, hinting at the agricultural richness that lay beyond the immediate desert scrub. The air would have felt different too, perhaps a little heavier with moisture, carrying the faint, sweet scent of distant vegetation, a promise of sustenance. At Gilgal, these 12 stones were carefully arranged, one upon the other, forming a memorial, a silent, enduring monument to the day's events. Picture the men, perhaps with the help of others, carefully lifting and positioning each heavy stone, their muscles straining, the soft thud of stone meeting stone echoing gently in the morning quiet. This was not a hasty construction, but a deliberate act of remembrance, each stone placed with intention, with a quiet reverence for the divine intervention they had witnessed. The sun, now higher in the sky, would have begun to warm the surfaces of these newly exposed stones, drawing out any lingering moisture, making them feel solid and permanent. Joshua explained the purpose of this monument, his voice calm and steady, meant to resonate not just with those present, but with generations yet unborn. He spoke of a time when their children, in the quiet curiosity of youth, would one day ask, "What do these stones mean?" And in that moment, the parents were to recount the story, to paint a vivid picture of the Jordan's waters being cut off before the Ark of the Covenant, of the priests standing firm on dry ground, of the entire nation passing over on solid earth. This was to be a story told around evening fires, under the vast, star-strewn sky, the flickering light dancing across the faces of eager listeners, the soft crackle of burning wood punctuating the narrative. It would be a tale whispered into sleepy ears, a foundational story woven into the very fabric of their identity. The stones themselves, standing silent and weathered, would become a tangible link to that miraculous day, a physical anchor for memory. They would absorb the warmth of the sun by day and the cool embrace of the desert night, their surfaces slowly changing with the passage of seasons, perhaps gathering a fine layer of dust or being washed clean by rare desert rains. Each stone, once part of the river's bed, now stood as a testament to a new beginning, a silent sentinel guarding the memory of a divine promise fulfilled. This act of building a memorial was deeply rooted in ancient Near Eastern traditions. Throughout the land surrounding Israel, it was common practice to erect stone pillars or altars to commemorate significant events, treaties, or divine encounters. These monuments served as physical markers in a world without widespread written records, acting as a collective memory aid for the community. They were often placed at crossroads or prominent locations, ensuring their visibility and constant reminder of the event they represented. The Israelites, though unique in their monotheistic faith, shared this cultural practice of using enduring stone to mark moments of profound significance, ensuring that the stories would be passed down, not just through oral tradition, but through a physical, unmoving presence in the landscape. The very act of carrying the stones, of building the monument, was a communal effort, strengthening the bonds between the tribes, solidifying their shared experience. Imagine the quiet conversations as the men worked, the shared glances of wonder, the unspoken understanding of the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The air would have been filled with the soft sounds of movement, perhaps the low murmur of voices, the rustle of clothing, the distant bleating of sheep or goats, all blending into the gentle symphony of a new day in a new land. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows and warming the plains, the people would have begun to settle into their new encampment. The immediate tasks would have been practical, setting up tents, organizing supplies, establishing a sense of order after the long journey. But beneath these practicalities, there would have been an underlying current of wonder and gratitude, a quiet hum of awe. The memory of the parted waters, of the dry riverbed, of the Ark of the Covenant leading the way, would have been fresh in everyone's mind, a vivid, almost tactile experience. The priests, who had stood steadfastly in the middle of the Jordan, holding the ark, would have been held in particular reverence. Their feet, having touched the very ground where the miracle unfolded, would have been seen as blessed, their presence a living link to the divine power that had orchestrated the crossing. They would have returned to the encampment, perhaps still feeling the lingering coolness of the riverbed on their skin, their robes perhaps still slightly damp from the spray of the returning waters, a subtle reminder of their sacred vigil. The land itself, the plains of Jericho, would have presented a new sensory landscape. The air, though still dry, would have carried different scents than the deep desert, perhaps the faint, sweet aroma of date palms from nearby oases, or the earthy smell of cultivated fields, a stark contrast to the endless expanse of sand and rock they had left behind. The sounds would have been different too, perhaps the distant chirping of birds not found in the deeper wilderness, or the gentle rustle of leaves in a breeze, a softer, more fertile sound than the whisper of wind across barren dunes. The people would have looked out across these plains, their eyes scanning the horizon, taking in the new vistas. To the west, the formidable walls of Jericho would have been visible, a silent, imposing presence, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of the crossing, there was a sense of profound relief, a deep breath taken after a long and arduous journey. The wilderness, with its harsh beauty and demanding trials, was behind them. The promised land, with its own mysteries and challenges, lay before them. The memory of the crossing was not just an event, it was a foundational experience that would shape their understanding of their God and their destiny. It was a tangible demonstration of divine faithfulness, a powerful reassurance that the God who had led them through the desert would continue to guide and protect them. The 12 stones at Gilgal would stand as a constant, silent sermon, a physical reminder that the impossible was possible, that the uncrossable could be crossed, and that the promises made to their ancestors were indeed coming to fruition. As evening descended, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, the camp at Gilgal would have settled into a quiet rhythm. The fires would have been lit, their warm glow casting dancing shadows on the tents and the surrounding landscape. The air would have grown cooler, carrying the scent of wood smoke and cooking food, mingling with the earthy aromas of the plain. Children, tired from the day's events and the excitement of the new surroundings, would have drifted off to sleep, perhaps dreaming of parted waters and towering stone monuments. The adults, gathered around their fires, might have spoken in hushed tones, recounting the day's miracle, their voices soft and reflective. The memory of the Jordan, once a formidable barrier, now lay behind them, a conquered obstacle. The sound of the wind, rustling through the sparse vegetation, would have been a gentle, soothing presence, a natural lullaby. The vast, star-filled sky above would have seemed even more immense, more profound, a silent witness to the unfolding story of a people finding their way home. The stones at Gilgal, now bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, would have stood sentinel, absorbing the quiet energy of the encampment, their rough surfaces a testament to time and transformation. They were not just rocks, they were vessels of memory, imbued with the sacred story of a nation's passage. Their very presence would have been a comfort, a grounding force in a new and unfamiliar land, a silent promise that the journey, though long and filled with trials, was leading them to the fulfillment of an ancient covenant. The quiet murmuring of the camp, the soft crackle of dying embers, the gentle breath of the night wind, all would have contributed to a sense of peace, a fragile but profound tranquility. The events of the day, so monumental, would have begun to settle into the collective consciousness, becoming part of the shared narrative, a story to be told and retold for generations. The land itself, now their temporary home, would have seemed to embrace them, its ancient earth providing a soft bed for their weary bodies, its silent hills watching over their slumber. The scent of the desert, now subtly mingled with the promise of fertility, would have been a gentle reminder of both where they had come from and where they were going, a comforting blend of past and future, all held within the quiet embrace of the night. The 12 stones, standing firm and resolute under the watchful gaze of the moon and the countless stars, would have been a constant, silent presence, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the miraculous hand that had guided them through the river's depths, now resting quietly on the plains of Jericho, waiting for the new day to bring its own challenges and its own quiet moments of revelation. Revelation. The cool evening air, which had settled over the plains of Jericho, now began to give way to the first faint stirrings of dawn, a pearly grey light slowly seeping across the eastern horizon, painting the jagged peaks of the Moabite hills with soft hues of rose and lavender. A hush still lay over the vast encampment, a temporary city of tents spread across the fertile plain, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of wood smoke from the previous night's fires, and perhaps a hint of the sweet, pungent odor of the desert shrubs that dotted the landscape. The Jordan River, having resumed its natural course, flowed onward, a ribbon of silver in the nascent light, its gentle murmur a constant, calming counterpoint to the quiet breathing of thousands of slumbering souls. As the sun, a nascent ember, began to peek over the distant ridges, its first rays would have touched the surfaces of the 12 stones, now carefully arranged in a circle, or perhaps a cairn, a deliberate monument standing sentinel on the plain. These stones, still damp from their journey through the riverbed, would have caught the light, their rough surfaces shimmering with a faint, almost ethereal glow, each one a silent witness to the extraordinary event of the day before. They were not just ordinary rocks, they were tangible pieces of the riverbed itself, plucked from the very spot where the priest's feet had stood firm, holding back the mighty current, a physical reminder for generations yet unborn. Joshua, whose name meant Yahweh is salvation, would have been among the first to stir, perhaps even before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, his mind already turning to the immense task that lay before him and his people. He carried the heavy mantle of leadership, a burden passed down from Moses, and with it, the weight of expectation, the hopes and fears of an entire nation. His gaze, in those quiet moments, might have swept across the sleeping camp, then eastward towards the river, and finally, westward towards the formidable walls of Jericho, a city that loomed like a silent challenge on the edge of their new home. The air, though still cool, carried the promise of a warmer day, and with it, the stirring of new purpose. The first sounds would have been the soft rustle of canvas as tents were slowly unzipped or untied, the low murmur of voices, still hushed by the early hour, and the gentle crackle of kindling as small fires were coaxed back to life, their smoke rising in thin, vertical columns against the brightening sky. The smell of baking bread, a staple of their diet, would soon begin to waft through the camp, mingling with the earthy scent of morning dew. Children, still sleepy-eyed, might emerge from their tents, their bare feet padding softly on the cool ground, their curiosity perhaps drawing them towards the unusual sight of the stone monument. It was during these early moments of the new day that Joshua would have gathered the elders, the heads of the tribes, their faces etched with the wisdom of years and the experiences of the wilderness. He would have spoken to them, his voice calm and steady, about the significance of the stones. When your children ask in time to come, "What do these stones mean to you?" he might have said, his words echoing softly in the morning stillness, "Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever." This act of remembrance was not merely a historical record, it was a pedagogical tool, a way to embed the miraculous into the very fabric of their communal memory, ensuring that the story would be passed down from generation to generation, woven into the lullabies sung to infants and the tales told around evening fires. The stones were a physical anchor, a tangible link to the divine intervention that had brought them to this fertile land, a constant reminder that their journey was not by chance, but by divine design. For a people who had wandered for 40 years, whose lives had been defined by transient encampments, a permanent monument was a profound statement of arrival, a declaration of their rootedness in this promised land. Beyond the immediate encampment, the land stretched out, a landscape subtly different from the parched wilderness they had left behind. Here, the soil was richer, darkened by the annual flooding of the Jordan, capable of sustaining crops in a way the desert never could. The air felt softer, less abrasive, and the distant calls of unfamiliar birds would have added a new layer to the soundscape, a gentle symphony of a land teeming with life. The trees, perhaps date palms or sycamores, would have offered welcome shade, their leaves rustling softly in the nascent breeze. As the morning progressed, the camp would have fully awakened, a hive of activity, yet still imbued with a sense of awe. The priests, having carried the heavy Ark of the Covenant, would have been resting, their sacred duty fulfilled for the moment, but their presence a constant reminder of the spiritual heart of the nation. The Levites, their assistants, would be attending to the daily rituals, the preparation of offerings, and the maintenance of the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary that had accompanied them throughout their long journey. The tabernacle itself, with its intricate curtains of fine linen and colorful embroidered fabrics, would have stood at the center of the camp, a beacon of their faith, its golden vessels and sacred objects gleaming faintly within its veiled interior. The crossing of the Jordan was not just a physical passage, it was a spiritual transition. It marked the end of the wilderness generation's journey and the beginning of the new generation's inheritance. The old generation, those who had doubted and rebelled in the wilderness, had largely passed away, their bones scattered across the arid landscapes. This new generation, born and raised under the cloud of the tabernacle, knew only the constant presence of God's guidance and provision. They were poised to claim the land, not through their own strength, but through the strength of the one who had parted the waters for them. The narrative then shifts to another significant event that took place on the plains of Jericho, the renewal of the covenant through circumcision. This ancient ritual, a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham, had been neglected during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. It was a physical mark, a visible sign of belonging to the chosen people, a commitment to the divine covenant. The men who had been born in the wilderness had not been circumcised, perhaps due to the harsh conditions of their nomadic life, or perhaps as a deliberate pause in the ritual, waiting for the moment of arrival in the promised land. Joshua, under divine instruction, commanded that all the men who had been born during the wilderness wanderings be circumcised. This would have been a momentous and somewhat vulnerable undertaking. The act itself was painful, and the recovery period would have rendered the men temporarily incapacitated, unable to defend themselves or their families. To perform such a mass circumcision on the very threshold of enemy territory, with the formidable walls of Jericho looming nearby, was an act of profound faith and obedience. It demonstrated an absolute trust in God's protection, a belief that He would safeguard them even in their moment of weakness. Imagine the scene: thousands of men gathered together, perhaps near the newly erected stone monument, or in a designated area of the camp. The instruments would have been flints or sharp stones, as was the custom in ancient times, carefully prepared for the task. The air would have been filled with a mixture of solemnity and perhaps a quiet apprehension. The older men, those who had been circumcised in Egypt, would have understood the significance, perhaps offering words of encouragement to the younger ones. The women would have been tending to their families, preparing soothing salves and comforting their sons and husbands. The act of circumcision was not just a physical operation, it was a symbolic shedding of the wilderness identity, a purification, a reconsecration to God before they embarked on the conquest of the land. It was a clear demarcation between the old life of wandering and the new life of settlement, a sign that they were truly God's people, ready to fulfill His purpose. The pain endured would have been a shared experience, forging a deeper bond among the men, a collective sacrifice for the sake of their covenant with God. During the days of recovery, while the men were healing, the entire camp would have been in a state of quiet repose. The usual bustling activities would have been subdued. The sounds of daily life would have been softer, the movements more gentle. The women would have taken on even more responsibility, ensuring that everyone was cared for, that food was prepared, and that the camp remained orderly. This period of enforced rest, though born of a painful ritual, would have also provided a time for reflection, for the people to fully absorb the reality of their new surroundings, to gaze upon the fertile plains and the distant mountains, and to contemplate the journey that had brought them to this very spot. It was during this time, while the people were recovering, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, declaring, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." This declaration, imbued with deep historical and spiritual meaning, marked a profound turning point. The reproach of Egypt referred to the shame of slavery, the taunts of their former captors, and perhaps even the lingering doubts within their own hearts about their identity and their God's power. For 40 years, they had been a people without a settled home, a constant reminder of their past bondage. Now, having crossed the Jordan and renewed their covenant, that shame was lifted, replaced by the dignity of a people chosen by God, standing on the threshold of their inheritance. To commemorate this moment, the place was named Gilgal, a name derived from the Hebrew word galal, meaning to roll. It was a name that would forever echo with the memory of that day, a testament to God's faithfulness in removing their shame and establishing them as His own. Gilgal became their base camp, a central hub from which they would launch their campaigns, and to which they would return. It was a place of rest, of worship, and of strategic importance. The plains of Gilgal, therefore, became more than just a temporary encampment. They became a sacred space, hallowed by the miraculous crossing of the Jordan, the solemn act of circumcision, and the divine declaration of their renewed identity. The air here would have felt different, charged with a sense of purpose and divine presence. The sunlight, falling upon the tents and the faces of the people, would have seemed to carry a new warmth, a blessing upon their endeavors. Following this period of healing and consecration, another significant event occurred, the celebration of the Passover. This ancient festival, commemorating their liberation from slavery in Egypt, had been observed intermittently during their wilderness journey, but now, in the Promised Land, it was celebrated with renewed fervor and significance. The Passover lamb, sacrificed and roasted, its bitter herbs and unleavened bread, would have been prepared and consumed by every household, a communal meal that bound them together in shared memory and hope. The scent of roasting lamb and unleavened bread would have filled the evening air, mingling with the soft glow of countless small fires. The murmur of families gathered together, recounting the story of their deliverance, would have created a tapestry of sound, a collective act of remembrance and gratitude. For many, This would have been the first Passover celebrated on the very soil of the Promised Land, a moment of profound fulfillment, a tangible realization of the promises made to their ancestors. The taste of the bitter herbs would have reminded them of their past suffering, while the sweetness of the roasted lamb would have spoken of God's provision and grace. And then, on the day after the Passover, a subtle but profound change occurred in their daily lives. For 40 years, God had miraculously provided manna, a bread-like substance that appeared on the ground each morning, sustaining them in the barren wilderness. It was a constant, daily reminder of their absolute dependence on God. But now, as they ate the produce of the land to the grain and the fruits of Canaan to the manna ceased. Imagine the morning after Passover, the sun rising as usual, casting its golden light across the plain. The people would have woken, perhaps with the usual expectation of gathering manna. But as they emerged from their tents, they would have found the ground empty, no shimmering dew-like substance, no miraculous provision. Instead, the fields around them, cultivated by the previous inhabitants, were ripe with grain. The trees bore fruit. The land itself was now providing for them. This cessation of manna was not a withdrawal of God's provision, but a transition to a new form of provision. It signaled the end of their wilderness journey and the full commencement of their life in the Promised Land. They were no longer a nomadic people entirely dependent on a daily miracle. They were now a settled people, called to cultivate the land, to work and to reap its bounty. The taste of the fresh produce of Canaan to the rich grains, the sweet fruits, the vibrant vegetables would have been a revelation after 40 years of manna, a tangible taste of the abundance of their new home. The sounds of harvesting, the rustle of grain being gathered, the laughter of children discovering new foods, would have replaced the quiet morning ritual of manna collection. The narrative then brings us to a moment of solitary encounter for Joshua, a pivotal moment that would set the stage for the conquest of Jericho. He was near Jericho, perhaps scouting the city's formidable defenses, or simply contemplating the immense task ahead. The sun might have been setting, casting long shadows across the plain, or perhaps it was the quiet stillness of early morning, before the camp stirred. The air would have been still, carrying the faint scent of distant fires and the earthy aroma of the fertile plain. As Joshua looked up, he saw a man standing before him, sword drawn in his hand. This was no ordinary encounter. The figure was imposing, his presence radiating an authority that transcended the human. Joshua, ever the warrior, approached him with courage, asking, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" His question was direct, born of the immediate concern for his people's safety and success. The man's reply was profound and unexpected, "No, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." This was not a mere mortal, but a divine messenger, perhaps an angel, or even a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ himself, a Theophane. The drawn sword was not for battle against Joshua, but a symbol of his authority and readiness for divine judgment. Joshua's response was immediate and reverent. He fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, acknowledging the divine presence. His question shifted from a tactical inquiry to a humble plea, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" He recognized that he was standing on holy ground, in the presence of the divine. The commander of the Lord's army then gave Joshua a command that echoed Moses' encounter at the burning bush, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." This act of removing sandals was a sign of respect and humility in the presence of the sacred, a recognition that this ground, though seemingly ordinary, was now consecrated by divine presence. The dust of the plain, clinging to his feet, would have been shed, a symbolic purification before receiving divine instruction. This encounter served as a powerful affirmation for Joshua. It reminded him that he was not alone in this monumental task, that the Lord himself was leading the charge, that the battles to be fought were not merely human conflicts but divine engagements. It was a moment of profound reassurance, instilling in him the courage and conviction needed to face the seemingly insurmountable challenge of Jericho. The silence that followed, after the divine messenger had delivered his message and perhaps vanished as mysteriously as he appeared, would have been filled with the weight of revelation, the soft rustle of the evening breeze through the grasses, the distant hoot of an owl, and the quiet beating of Joshua's own heart, now filled with a renewed sense of purpose and an unshakable faith in the invisible hand that guided his every step, preparing him for the next chapter in the unfolding story of their entrance into the Promised Land, a story that would soon lead them to the imposing walls of Jericho, waiting silently under the watchful gaze of the desert stars, its fate already sealed by the commander of the Lord's army, its very foundations trembling, though unseen, with the silent anticipation of the coming divine intervention, a quiet tremor in the earth itself, a whisper of the power that would soon be unleashed. A power that would reshape the landscape and redefine the meaning of victory, all under the soft, unblinking eyes of the ancient moon, casting long, ethereal shadows across the sleeping plains, where the 12 stones stood as a silent testament, and the Jordan flowed ever onward, a constant, murmuring reminder of the miracles that had brought them to this very threshold, a threshold now charged with a quiet, potent energy, a stillness before the storm, a deep, resonant hum of destiny about to unfold, a gentle whisper in the night air, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant hope, as the camp slept, dreaming of a future that was now within their grasp, a future woven with the threads of divine promise and human obedience, a tapestry slowly unfurling under the vast, star-studded canopy of the desert sky, each star a pinprick of light in the infinite dark, mirroring the countless promises made and kept, a silent symphony of creation and covenant, playing out over the sleeping forms of a people on the verge of their inheritance, their dreams mingling with the soft breath of the night, and the faint, rhythmic pulse of the earth beneath them, a steady, calming beat that promised both rest and renewal, a deep, abiding peace that settled over the land, like a soft blanket of mist, blurring the edges of the known and the unknown, inviting the weary mind to drift, to surrender to the gentle current of the story, to float on the waves of ancient history, carried softly towards the shores of sleep, where all anxieties dissolve into the quiet embrace of the deep, dark night, a night filled with the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a lullaby whispered by the wind through the tall grasses, a soft, rhythmic sway that rocks the soul into a profound and peaceful rest, a rest as deep and wide as the river itself, flowing endlessly towards the sea, carrying with it all the worries of the day, leaving behind only the quiet echoes of a story well told, a story that continues to unfold, even as the conscious mind begins to fade, dissolving into the soft, velvety darkness, a darkness that holds within it the promise of a new dawn, a new beginning, a gentle, unhurried journey into the deepest realms of peaceful slumber, where dreams are woven from the threads of ancient tales and the quiet murmurs of a world at rest, a world where the only sound is the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping earth, and the gentle, almost imperceptible whisper of the wind through the desert grasses, a sound that lulls and soothes. A gentle, continuous hum that invites the listener to sink deeper and deeper into the comforting embrace of sleep, a sleep as profound and restorative as the stillness of the desert night, a night filled with the quiet magic of ancient stories, and the soft, steady rhythm of a heart at peace, drifting, 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 drifting. The first rays of dawn, soft and pearlescent, began to stretch across the eastern sky, painting the distant Moabite hills in hues of rose and lavender, a gentle light that slowly chased away the deep indigo of the night, revealing the vast, silent expanse of the desert floor where the people of Israel now rested, their journey across the miraculously parted Jordan completed, their feet finally planted on the soil of Canaan. A cool, dry breeze, carrying the faint scent of sun-baked earth and distant scrub, whispered through the encampment, rustling the fabric of the tents and stirring the embers of the overnight fires, which now glowed with a subdued, sleepy warmth, casting flickering shadows that danced lazily against the canvas. The air, still holding the chill of the desert night, promised the rapid ascent of the sun and the inevitable warmth of the coming day, a warmth that would soon dry the last traces of moisture from the riverbed and from the clothes of those who had passed through it. Joshua, his heart a quiet symphony of awe and gratitude, stood near the edge of the camp, his gaze fixed eastward toward the now flowing Jordan, its waters once again coursing with their familiar, powerful current, a shimmering ribbon of silver under the nascent light. He could still feel the phantom sensation of the dry, packed earth beneath his sandals, the ground that had been miraculously revealed for their passage, a path that had been both solid and sacred, a testament to a promise kept. The memory of the priests, standing steadfast in the very middle of the riverbed, their feet planted firmly on the dry ground, bearing the Ark of the Covenant, that sacred chest of acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, its carrying poles resting on their shoulders, remained vivid in his mind, a powerful image of unwavering faith and divine presence. Their long robes, perhaps still damp at the hems from the initial approach to the water's edge, would have clung slightly, but their posture, even under the immense weight of the ark and the greater weight of their responsibility, had been one of serene determination, their eyes fixed on the distant bank, waiting for every single soul to pass. The command from the Lord had been clear, echoing in the quiet chambers of Joshua's mind like a gentle, persistent hum: choose 12 men, one from each tribe, and let them return to the very spot where the priest's feet had stood, unmoving, in the heart of the riverbed. And from that sacred place, each man was to lift a stone, a large, smooth stone, one that could be carried on a shoulder, a stone that would bear the silent witness of this profound moment for generations yet unborn. The thought of these stones, heavy with the memory of the miraculous crossing, brought a quiet sense of purpose to Joshua's heart, a recognition of the importance of remembrance, of tangible markers in a world that often forgot its blessings too quickly. These were not just rocks, they were monuments of grace, silent storytellers of a journey completed. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in ever brighter shades of gold and azure, the chosen men, their faces etched with a mixture of reverence and quiet resolve, began their solemn task. They walked back toward the river, their footsteps soft upon the dry earth, the air around them still cool enough to make their breath visible in faint wisps. The sound of the Jordan, now flowing freely again, was a constant, murmuring presence, a soft rush that filled the air, a natural counterpoint to the quiet determination of the men. They descended into the riverbed, the same path that millions had just traversed, now once more submerged beneath the swirling currents, but they knew the exact spot, guided by the memory of the priests and the ark. The water, clear and cool, swirled around their ankles, then their knees, as they carefully navigated the riverbed, feeling with their feet for the solid, unyielding ground where the ark had rested. Each man, with deliberate movements, bent down into the flowing water, his hands searching beneath the current, feeling the smooth, cool surfaces of the river stones, selecting one that felt substantial, one that resonated with the weight of the moment. The effort of lifting these stones from the riverbed against the gentle resistance of the water was a quiet labor, a physical act imbued with spiritual significance. The sound of the water, rushing past their ears, seemed to amplify the quietness of their task, the soft splash of a hand reaching, the subtle shift of a stone being dislodged from its ancient resting place. They emerged from the river, their clothes damp, their shoulders now bearing the silent weight of history, the stones cool and heavy against their skin, glistening with the fresh water of the Jordan. They carried these 12 stones, each one a silent echo of a tribe, a family, a promise, back to the encampment at Gilgal. The name itself, Gilgal, would come to mean a rolling away, a place where the reproach of Egypt would be rolled away, a place of new beginnings, of covenant renewed. As they arrived, the sun was now fully awake, casting long, sharp shadows from the tents and the people, and the air was beginning to warm, carrying the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke from the breakfast fires. The men carefully placed the stones in a circle, one beside the other, forming a silent, enduring monument in the heart of their new home. The rough textures of the stones, their varied shapes and sizes, spoke of the individuality of the tribes, yet their collective placement in a circle symbolized their unity, their shared journey, their common destiny. Joshua then spoke, his voice calm and steady, carrying across the gathering crowd, a voice that held the quiet authority of a leader who had witnessed the miraculous. He explained the purpose of the stones, not as an order, but as a gentle teaching, a legacy for their children and their children's children. He spoke of the day when their descendants, perhaps little ones with curious eyes, would ask, "What do these stones mean?" And in that moment, the parents, the elders, would recount the story of the Jordan, the waters parted, the dry path, the Ark of the Covenant, the mighty hand of the Lord, a story that would be passed down like a precious heirloom, woven into the very fabric of their identity. The stones would be a silent sermon, a tangible reminder that the living God had indeed been among them, leading them, protecting them, fulfilling his ancient promises. Later that day, as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long, golden light across the newly established camp, the people settled into the routines of their first night in the Promised Land. The air, still warm from the day's sun, began to cool with the approach of evening, bringing with it a gentle, refreshing breeze. The sounds of the camp were a soft symphony of domesticity, the low murmur of conversations, the gentle clatter of cooking pots, the occasional bleating of a goat, the distant, rhythmic sound of a child's lullaby carried on the evening air. The scent of cooking fires, now burning steadily, mingled with the faint, sweet smell of wild herbs from the surrounding fields, creating a comforting aroma that promised sustenance and rest. The moon, a slender crescent, began to emerge in the darkening sky, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the landscape, illuminating the newly erected monument of stones, which stood like silent sentinels, absorbing the moonlight, their surfaces cool and smooth to the touch. The stars, one by one, began to prick the velvet darkness, sparkling with a brilliance that only a desert sky can offer, a vast, silent canopy under which generations had lived and dreamed. The air grew cooler still, inviting the people to draw their cloaks a little tighter, to gather closer around the dwindling warmth of their fires. As night deepened, a profound sense of peace settled over the camp at Gilgal. The long, arduous journey through the wilderness, the 40 years of wandering, the countless trials and triumphs, had culminated in this moment, this quiet night in the land of promise. The sounds of the Jordan River, a constant, soothing murmur in the distance, became a natural lullaby, a soft, rhythmic whisper that spoke of continuity and the enduring power of nature. The wind, now a gentle sigh, rustled through the dry grasses on the plains, a soft, whispering sound that seemed to carry the ancient stories of the land, stories of shepherds and nomads, of rain and drought, of life and resilience. The people, tired from their journey and the day's momentous events, began to drift into sleep, their bodies finding rest on the soft, yielding earth beneath the vast, star-strewn sky. The fires, now mostly embers, glowed with a deep, ruby red, casting only the faintest light, allowing the darkness to fully embrace the sleeping camp. The air grew still, holding the lingering scent of wood smoke and the cool, clean essence of the desert night. The only sounds were the soft, even breathing of the sleepers, the occasional rustle of a tent flap in the gentle breeze, and the distant, unchanging murmur of the Jordan, flowing onward, a timeless river in a timeless land. Under the watchful gaze of the countless stars, the stones at Gilgal stood silent, a testament to a journey completed, a promise fulfilled, a new beginning. Their rough surfaces, cool beneath the night sky, held the memory of the rushing water, the dry path, the steady feet of the priests, the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of the divine. They were a quiet anchor in the vastness of the land, a point of remembrance for a people who had crossed a boundary, entering a new chapter of their story. The desert night, vast and encompassing, wrapped around the sleeping camp like a soft, warm blanket, inviting deep and restorative rest. The gentle breeze continued its soft, rhythmic whisper through the dry grasses, a sound like silk rustling, a quiet, repetitive shush, shush, shush. The distant murmur of the Jordan, a constant, low hum, blended seamlessly with the soft breathing of the sleeping multitude, creating a symphony of peace. The air, cool and dry, carried the faint, earthy scent of the land, a smell of ancient soil and distant, unseen flowers, a scent that invited the mind to wander, to drift, to settle. The stars, brilliant and countless, shimmered in the inky blackness above, each one a tiny, distant lamp, casting no light, only a sense of infinite depth and quiet wonder. The stillness of the night, profound and unbroken, enveloped everything, a soft, comforting embrace that invited the listener to sink deeper and deeper into the comforting embrace of sleep, a sleep as profound and restorative as the stillness of the desert night, a night filled with the quiet magic of ancient stories, and the soft, steady rhythm of a heart at peace, drifting, drifting, drifting. That is where we leave our story tonight. These moments of quiet are yours, you have earned them. If easy drift sleep has become part of your night, subscribing keeps us close. Sweet dreams and rest well.